Greetings viewers, Eric the Car Guy here, back again with another Fairmont repair video for you. It's kind of like plumbing where you start at the sink and you end at the street. Well, in the previous episode, we'd replaced the brake hoses on this vehicle, and after bleeding the brakes and everything, I go to put the wheel back on and it won't move. In fact, it won't move a lot. It takes a great deal of effort. It should not be that way. Reason for this is the caliper itself is having an issue. Thing is I'm hoping to replace the whole front brake system, actually front and rear brake system on this at some point, so it doesn't really make sense to buy a new caliper for it. This is a perfect opportunity to rebuild a caliper, and that's what today's video is all about. We're going to rebuild this right front caliper on this Fairmont, and it'll be fun. I know I said in a previous video that it probably wasn't the best idea, but there are circumstances where this would apply. The caliper itself was going to cost me about $25–30 to replace. I was able to get a rebuild kit for $3. However, there was $8 in shipping. Still less. I'm still getting out the door for a little bit better than what I had beforehand. So you got to do what you got to do. But in order for me to get this thing on the track, it has to have working brakes. So let's get started by getting this caliper off of here and rebuilding it. Come on over. All right. Well, the first step to rebuilding a caliper is getting it off the wheel. And in this case, well, we got a little bit of a problem with it sort of still holding on, but we'll manage. I have these fasteners. There's two of them on this type. There's two 11mm fasteners that hold the caliper to the bracket. Also, we need to get our brake hose loose, but we know that's going to come loose without much difficulty. I'm going to move my sockets, and you know what? Before I really get into this, I'm going to go and grab my oil drip pan and put it underneath, because there is going to be a little brake fluid that drips out. So I'm going to go grab that, and I'll be right back. All right, you might be asking yourself, there are situations where the brake hose can cause a similar situation, cause the caliper to hang up. But obviously, as you can see, because in our last video we replaced the brake hoses, they obviously are not the problem. I'm fairly certain it is the caliper, but that's something you need to be mindful of. And one of the ways that you can actually check to see if the brake hose or the caliper was the issue, because it's so difficult to move now, if I were to knock the bleeder valve loose and a little bit of pressure came out and then it was easy to move, then I could actually start to suspect the brake hose might be the problem in that instance. So if you're curious if it's a brake hose or a caliper, well, that's one way that you might be able to figure that out. But for us, I know this is our new brake hose, but I'm going to use my clamping tool, and it's just a pair of needle nose vice grips with a couple pieces of fuel line on the end of it. They do make a special tool for this. I'm just going to crimp off the brake line. That'll help keep the entire system from bleeding out while we work, because we're going to need a little bit of time to get this caliper apart and replace its internals. So I will start by removing the two 11mm fasteners, top and bottom. And these pins are also slide pins. So during the process of our rebuild, we're going to clean these up and add some new lubrication to this so that this works well. I'm also going to knock my brake line loose while I'm here. So I'm just going to come in. This is a 16mm on this one, and just knock that loose. I don't need to get it all the way out now, especially since I have my pliers on here. I'm actually going to spin the caliper off the line. Now it's just a matter of, hopefully, prying this up off of here. It's on there pretty good. And I'm not so concerned about these rotors either, because this is one of the things about this job. I'm doing it in a sense begrudgingly, because if I want to go to the track, I have to have working brakes. But I'm not going to replace the brake pads. Some of you might be asking that also. This entire brake system is going to be renewed at some point, and it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to invest in this now. I mean, we've got plenty of brake pad material left here. So let's just see if we can there we go. All right, this inner pad here can just come off. Well, I guess that's easier said than done. We might have to take the front pad off first. So we'll just do that elsewhere. But now that we've got our brake line already loose, we can just spin the caliper right off of that. And I'm gonna hold it over my drip pan here so that as it comes off, that fluid has someplace to go. There we go, and as you can see, because I've got that those pliers on there, that I'm not going to get it dripping out, and it's not going to bleed my master cylinder all the way out. This, however, is going to leak out a little bit. We don't need all that fluid in there. And I kind of missed my pan. So much for trying to work clean. Now let's take this guy over to the bench and rebuild it. All right, now over here on the bench, we'll do the actual rebuild of the caliper itself. Come on down in here. First thing we're going to need to do is get that rear brake pad off. And with this, this type has sort of a spring clip for the front pads. And yes, they're old and they don't look so great, but I'm not putting a lot of miles on this car. So I'm not losing sleep over this. But there's plenty of friction material left, enough for my purposes until I get updated calipers. Now that I've taken this front pad off, I'm actually going to put it back on. And in this type, there's these little pins that are here that need to line up with these holes, is what we're doing. So when I put this in, I'm going to try to slide it in such a way where you can sort of hear it click home. And I'm just going to leave that pad there because now we need to get the piston out of here. So how do we do that? How do we get the piston out of this bore? Well, we're going to have some fun. We're going to use our friend compressed air. And hopefully this will work. If this doesn't work, we have to employ other methods, which basically means we have to screw a fitting in here or maybe a Zerk fitting onto here and keep pumping grease into this until the piston pops out. But many times compressed air will do the trick. So why don't you come down in here to where you can see. All right, you ready? Don't be scared. Yeah, that part's kind of cool. Now that we've got the piston out, sorry if I scared you, I'm going to, yes, I know the brake pads might have suffered. We'll see. We'll see how bad they are. Honestly, not too bad. A little bit of brake fluid. I can take some brake clean and get that out of that pad. I've actually got a friend of mine who used a torch and burned out contaminated friction material, but that's another video. Okay, we'll set that aside, but here we have our prize, the actual caliper piston. As you can see, it's gotten a little bit dirty. I'm gonna get a cleaner rag for this here in the future. This is part of the problem, and this is one of the reasons that I don't advocate rebuilding calipers that often, because just replacing the seals, well, that's all well and good. But this is your real issue right here. You see this rust and all this pitting? This pretty much makes this caliper piston junk. And I can clean this up as best I can, but when you run into this is what really causes the problem, because there's a really tight interference fit between the seal that's in here and this piston. And if it gets all rusted and pitted like this, the seal will catch on this. It will damage the seal over time, and away you go. We will do our best to clean up what we have, because remember, this is more temporary than anything. Here inside the caliper itself, there are really only two parts to this. The first is the dust seal, which honestly, for me, has given me the most trouble in the past. I probably should go get a screwdriver or something to pull that out. Oh, there we go. She broke loose. All right, so we've been able to peel that out. This is the dust boot. Sometimes these will rip. And as I said, this is just a dust boot. This is just there to keep out the contaminants and everything else, is all this is for. All right, next we need to remove the square cut seal. And this is really what makes the caliper work. And it sits in a groove in there, but this is it. This is the heart and soul of the caliper. And the reason this works, so this helps seal the caliper piston. but it also works as the return spring for this. The reason why it was hanging up and the reason why the caliper was stuck on is because this seal was not working as a return spring. So when you apply the brakes, fluid pressure comes to the back of this piston, and as it does, it rolls this seal over. So the seal is pushed out like this, but as soon as you release pressure, that square cut seal helps pull it back into place. It's just a very minute amount, but it's enough during the course of the movement of the caliper to cause the caliper to work. So this is really the heart of the caliper. And as you can see, this seal is somewhat compromised. The rubber itself is starting to fray and come apart a little bit, and that's probably due to that corrosion that I told you about. So we'll do our best to clean this up, and we'll get this together, but there's our old parts. This is what comes in a caliper rebuild kit. You get a dust boot and a square cut seal. So that is, that is everything in the kit, so that's not a whole lot there. But we can get rid of these old parts, and why don't we take this over to the parts washer. We'll get it all cleaned up on the inside and get this all ready, and then we'll come back and see what we can do to clean this piston up. And then we'll assemble it, and hopefully we'll have a working caliper. All right, remember this guy? You always ask me to use my parts washer. Well, here we are. We'll clean both the piston and the caliper itself. I'm still going to take this over to the wire wheel to try to get rid of some of that corrosion, but you know, we got a decent starting point anyway. Now, it's my hope that the other side doesn't get jealous. The other side's working fine, and I'm sure somebody's already asked that question by now. But as far as I know, the other side is fine. It's just this right side caliper is of primary concern at the moment. How are we looking? A lot better than we were when we brought it in. Still a little bit of goo, but not enough to write home about. I think we've taken care of the lion's share. I'll run some through where the brake line comes in, make sure that that passage is clear. I probably should have also said that before you put things in a parts washer, you should be mindful of rubber parts. Rubber parts, some of them may not respond well to exposure to parts cleaner. So that's something you might consider if you're doing this. And we'll dry it off with some compressed air and maybe clean this out on the inside a little bit. Looks like there's a little bit of corrosion down in there. Now, I didn't do a really good cleaning of this for a couple of reasons. First of all, I'm not restoring this to like new or better condition. I'm just getting this to mechanical working condition again is what I'm going for here. And as you saw, we've got a bad square cut seal. It's a little torn up. That's the reason why we're having this problem. So we just want to do everything possible to make sure that that square cut seal can work as it should when we're all done. So I'm going to go in with my rag and I'm going to wipe out the inside of the bore again and just get another look at it and see where we're at. Something I've done with these in the past that works extremely well is sandblasting. You can only go so far with that, but sandblasting does a really good job of, or bead blasting, or even better if you have walnuts or something like that. Something that's not going to damage this machine surface in here is what we're looking for. As you can see, there's a little bit of rust buildup. My primary concern is that ridge on the inside where that square cut seal rides. So I want to make sure that that's as clean as I can make it, because that's going to affect the mechanical function of the caliper. That's what I'm really going for. And I'll probably go in there with my pocket screwdriver and clean out that groove and clean out the dust boot groove, which is the one above it, a little bit better. And that should do it. Okay, I just had a thought. I've got my angle die grinder here, and it has this little wire wheel attachment that can get down in here. And I can clean out those grooves really nice with this. So I'll do that, hit it with the parts washer again real quick, a little bit of compressed air, and I'll call this caliper portion done. And then we'll deal with the piston. As you can see, that did a pretty good job of cleaning out the inside of that. As you can see, we've actually done a pretty good job in here now that we've been able to do that. So we're all, I think we're ready to go with the piston. Now, some of you might be concerned about this rust further down in. I am not, because that doesn't make any kind of contact with the piston or any of that stuff, and that's just going to come back anyway. My main concern, as I've said, is these grooves where the seals live. That's all I care about. So now let's get that piston cleaned up. Now I've got this crusty old piston. Going to take it over here on the wire wheel, try to clean up some of the junk, and we'll get this thing back together. As long as we're here, we might as well just take these slide pins and clean these up too on the wire wheel while we're at it, and we're good to go. All right, now back on the piston here, you can see even after cleaning it up, we still have all this pitting on the outside. What that's going to do is that's going to tear up our new seal. There's no way around it, because this rough surface against this rubber is that's just what's going to happen. Keep in mind, I'm only doing this as a quote-unquote temporary fix. It wasn't worth replacing. But this is why I've said in the past that if you run into this situation, or if you want to rebuild calipers, you're going to run into this. And this is going to make it so that your rebuilt caliper is not going to last. You may think you're saving money by rebuilding the caliper yourself, but it's like penny wise and pound foolish when you think about it, because if it doesn't last, then you're kind of stuck. So if you open up one of these calipers and you see this kind of pitting on here, which I'm going to tell you, you're just about always going to see this kind of pitting here, you might want to scrap the idea, because when they rebuild calipers, they put a whole new piston in. And that's really what's going to make the difference. They take this, run it through media blasting, whatever, then they put a new one of these in, and bam, they got a new caliper. So they're pretty much doing what we're doing here today, except for they're also doing these pistons. And if you're thinking, well, I'll just replace the piston at the same time, okay, great. But by the time you get done buying the piston and the rebuild kit, you might as well bought a rebuild caliper and been done with it. Anyway, let's first start by getting our square cut seal back into the bore. It is dry right now. We don't want to put it in dry. There's only one thing we can lubricate this with, and that is brake fluid. Do not use any petroleum-based compounds or anything that will cause the rubber to swell and cause the seal to fail. Only use brake fluid on the square cut seal. Say it with me, only brake fluid. I'm just going to take a little bit, and I'm just going to keep. In fact, I could even just about take it down in here and sort of cycle it right through. And if I just lost that down in there, I'm going to be so mad. Something that seems like a good idea is not always a good idea. All right, there are times on Eric the Car Guy where Eric the Car Guy does things that are mistakes, and those mistakes help you not make the same mistake. Wow, that's all the way down at the bottom. Jeez. Seriously, I need a longer screwdriver. Well, it's going to be one well-lubricated seal, I will say that. All right, remember kids, you don't have to do it like I did. I fall on my sword for you. All right, so we only lubricate this with brake fluid. A little bit of brake fluid down in here is not going to hurt either. Well, actually, it's not going to do us any good because it's just going to pour out the hole where the brake hose goes in. While I'm at it, I'm just going to lubricate this groove a little bit. And then we just do the opposite of what we did when we started, and just insert that guy down into that groove. And I probably should have mentioned before we do this that, like, when you get your new seal, compare it to the old seal. Make sure they're the same. Hold them up together. Because if you go through all this trouble and you don't have the right seal, well, your life is mud. All right. Now, that was the easy part. The dust boot, on the other hand, is a little more tricky. And we'll do that guy next. So we'll start with our piston, and we will also put a little bit of brake fluid on it to help lubricate it on its way in, particularly on this edge. I believe I've figured out the secret of the dust boot, and I think it's coming back to me now. And that is to put it on the bottom of the piston first, like so. So it's on there. And then you can set it down in here, and then work your way around to get the lip of the seal into its groove. Get some light for you. So this way, the piston is not being pushed down in at the same time. It's hard to do this one-handed, but I think you get the idea. So I'm going to go around the outside of this whole thing and see if I can get that dust boot to seat down in there. And once it does, I'll be able to push the piston down in, and then I'll just wrap the dust boot around this top lip here. There. Okay. I think that's pretty darn close. I'm going to go around and pull the lip up just to check to see if it's seated down in there, but I don't want to do it too much because this is one of those things where it's going to take, well, not a little patience, but a lot. But I think we're all down in there. Now I can start pushing the piston down in there, and it will lock both the dust boot and the square cut seal in place. And for that, I'm going to need to probably grab my channel locks again, push that down in. All right, hopefully this will continue to go in without incident. And either the dust seal is hanging up or I've got it just not seated in the bore right. Ah, there it went. Just needed to hold my tongue right. Okay, it's all down in there, and the dust seal just went home into the caliper, just slipped right into that upper ring. So there we are. One freshly rebuilt caliper, and it will function way better than it used to, that's for sure. And it was all this guy right here. It just boils down to that seal. This just keeps the junk out. This is the guy that does everything. It's the return spring as well as the seal. So it's got quite a bit of work to do there. All right. Stop yelling at me for using my old pads. Well, I'll say it again. This is a temporary solution moving towards bigger and better things. And as far as the contamination that's on it, not overly concerned because main reason is because it's not going to be a factor. You just need to get this thing for a pass down the track. Should be ready to install that on the vehicle. These aren't new brake pads, so we don't necessarily need to push the piston all the way back in, especially in this case. I'm not going to do that because, as I said, that pitting on the inside of that piston is what's going to tear up that seal. So the less exposure that piston has to that damaged area, the better. So that'll help it last longer. Now let's take it back to the car, bleed the brakes, and hopefully be done. Hopefully. Okay, one last thing that I'm going to do before I install this caliper is try to give it every advantage as far as working properly. And one of the ways I'm going to do that is these bosses here at the top and bottom on the caliper are where the caliper moves in and out. So I'm going to clean these up and put just a little bit of lubricant on those. I'm also, on the brake pads, going to do the same thing. As you can see that little bit of rust there. I'm going to clean that up because this whole area in here is what makes contact with this on the bracket. So I want to make sure that everything can move as good as it can and has good lubrication. Now this, it would have been great if my caliper rebuild kit came with new slides here, but this is what I've got. So it should look like this. This is what I have to work with. And I'm okay with it. I'm gonna use the right lubricants there, and that will also work like it should. But I guess since it's in my hand, I'll start with what's on the caliper, and we'll take it from there. I'm going to come in with a little bit of anti-seize. A little bit. You don't need to go overboard here on these places for lubrication. And do the same to the top. All right. Now, we can just first reattach our brake hose in the top. And as I did before, I'm going to spin the caliper onto the brake line. And it's very important that we don't cross thread during this process. If we do, well, all that work we just did pretty much be for naught. All right, now it's on there relatively tight. I want to make sure that I don't twist the brake hose, so that seems good there. I could also put a little bit of lubrication here, but I'm not going to. I think what's going to be on here and the fact that I've cleaned the surface is going to be sufficient. But if you wanted to add a little more lubricant there, it would not be a bad thing. And that just slid right down nicely, didn't it? For the slide pins, that's right, silicone paste. Not grease, not anti-seize, silicone paste. That's what we're going to use on these. And these just insert into those covers and in the back. I'm not going to just run it in with the impact. I'm going to start it first, get a couple of threads going. That way I know that these are seated where they're supposed to be. And lastly, we'll tighten up our brake hose. And now we bleed the brakes. Gonna get cameraman Brian back in the car and do that. We covered that more in detail in the last video, so I'll put a link into that. But I'll just show the basics of bleeding the brakes right here. And then we'll see if we got brakes. Okay, pump them up. All right, and you can see that the piston came out and made contact with the brake pad. So now I know that at least we got some pressure behind it. So now we'll proceed with bleeding the brakes here. All right, hold it. All right, pump them up. Hold it. Pump them up. Hold it. Okay, you could clearly see on that last one where there was very little air coming out through the tube, so I know that we're pretty good. Go ahead and pump it up and let me know how the pedal feels. How's that pedal, cameraman Brian?
It's feeling pretty stiff.
Nice. And I just want to make sure, after we bled the brakes, that the master's topped off, which I'll do now. Let's wrap this up. All right, well, we can now spin the wheel by hand, and everything is just wonderful and fine. Also, you want to make sure to check for leaks. around here. If you do see major leaks, obviously something went wrong, perhaps with that square cut seal. It might have gotten rolled over there in the course of the installation. But as I said, during the course of the rebuild, the square cut seal is really where it's at. And what's going to make your rebuild a success or a failure is likely going to be the corrosion that's on that piston. And if you do see corrosion on that piston, well, I would strongly recommend you just get a replacement caliper, because that's what's going to tear this seal up and eventually cause the caliper to fail again. You know, take that with a grain of salt. Me, like I said, I know I'm going to be changing out these brakes in the not too distant future. I don't put a whole lot of miles on this, but if this was my daily driver, I'd really want to make sure that it was good to go. But if you have to rebuild a caliper, I'm hoping this video walks you through the steps in order to do that. One other tip that I will say is putting the dust boot on the piston before inserting it into the caliper bore. It was probably a good idea. Doing it that way is the only way I could do it efficiently. It took a little bit of time. It was a bit fiddly, a bit tedious, but I was able to do it eventually. So that may help you. And I pulled the piston up just a little bit so I could sneak in just underneath that little beveled edge. That seemed to help a lot. But the dust boot is probably going to be the most difficult part of this job, if I'm honest. And of course, you've got to clean things up and make sure you only lubricate these parts with brake fluid. Anything else can cause them to fail. So be aware of that. And I believe that covers everything. But now we got a working caliper, so hopefully we'll be heading to the racetrack here soon. Anyway, I am the Eric the Car Guy. You can always find me at EricTheCarGuy.com, where there is a welcome video to tell you about the plethora of features we have at EricTheCarGuy.com to help you with any automotive issues you might have. In addition to that, if you wish to connect with me socially, I can be found on Google+, Facebook, and Twitter. And I close each of my videos with be safe, have fun, and of course, stay dirty. I'll see you next time.